Hi everyone. Today we're going to talk about how to write a summary, which is going to be a really important skill as we move into the research portion of our class. So let's get started. So first, let's talk about what is a summary. Most of us probably know what it is, but it doesn't hurt to just brush up on the description. So first and foremost, a summary is an overview and description of another text. It should be shorter than the original source. It should be in your own words, and it must represent the entire text. So the important thing to remember is a summary is not a series of quotes, and it's not a portion of the text. It's the whole thing. So why would you want to use a summary? First, we often use summary to demonstrate understanding. You summarize something your professor has had you read so that you can show that you understand what the text said and why it said it. Oftentimes in larger research papers, you can use summaries to give context for an argument. You might have read various articles or sources that you don't necessarily want to quote from, but you want to give kind of background information for the argument you're making. This gives an overview of the larger discussion. It shows that you've read and understood multiple sources so that you can compare them to one another without necessarily using quotes. But the important thing to remember is you use a summary when you don't need the exact wording or specific details, because summaries are big overviews. They're not specifically detailed. So how do we write a summary? Well, step one is you have to read the source. And then after you've read the source, step two is you have to reread the source. The only way that you can summarize a source or a text is if you 110% understand what you've read. So look up the words you don't know. If the text or your source is referring to people or places or events that you don't understand, that's what Google's for. Look them up. You need to annotate the text and read actively, because part of writing a summary is going to be going back and forth to the text to pull things out of it. Step three, divide and analyze. So the goal of a summary is to give the whole picture of a text. In order to do that, you have to first understand how the text is designed, what its purpose is, and what strategies it's using. Sound familiar? It's a lot of those rhetorical star points. So make sure that you understand what the main idea of the source is, and then what are the big supporting ideas that it's presenting. Sometimes doing a reverse outline of the source can help you with this, especially for more difficult texts. And then you're going to want to think about, well, what strategies does the author use? Is the author giving examples? Are they using a comparison? Does the author define any terms that you don't understand? Those strategies that are listed in your textbook are going to be really important when you start writing. So once you've divided up the text into its parts and really analyzed what each part is doing, you're ready to kind of start writing. Step four is that you list all the main points. You put them in your own words and be sure that you can write the thesis statement of the text. Then go back and check. Is each point that you wrote a main argument and a main detail, or is it just a supporting argument in the specific detail? Remember, with summary, you're looking for the big picture. Next, start outlining. Summaries are chronological. They are descriptions of texts. Basically, what you're doing is you're telling your reader, first, the author does this. Then the author does that. Finally, the author shows us this. So your outline and your organization should follow the organization of the original source or the original text. Step six, now it's time to really write. So you want your summary to always be shorter than the text, and you want to use signal phrases to indicate the information comes from a source. Well, what's a signal phrase? A signal phrase is essential anytime you're integrating outside research into your own writing. A signal phrase has two parts. You're going to name the title and or the author. Sometimes you'll name one, sometimes you'll name both, and an action verb. If you don't have an action verb, you don't have a signal phrase. So here's an example. Take a look at the silly little paragraph down below. Right away, The signal phrase names the article in the article, so we know that it's an article. It's not a book, it's not a movie, it's not a poem, it's not a novel. It's an article we're describing for our reader. And then we list the article's title, Wabbit Season. It's important that somewhere in your summary, right off the bat, you're listing the complete title. Remember, titles of articles go in quotation marks. Titles of bigger things like books, newspaper titles, magazine titles, those should be in italics. So here our writer has given the first part of the signal phrase, but since it's the very beginning of the quote, they also give us the author's name, which is also an important thing to do, especially if the author is a well-known person. And if you notice, we don't just get the author's name once. The first time we get the author's name, we get the full name, first and last. After that, the writer of this summary has used pronouns like he and also the author's last name to give continuity to the entire summary. This is something that people who are just starting to write summaries often forget to do. A lot of times they'll name the source right at the beginning and then never again. But this repetition of the name can actually aid in transitioning between points in your summary. So you want to make sure that you're constantly going back to the author. Now here's that second part of the signal phrase. Take a look at all these verbs. Elmer Fudd explains. He gives an example. He uses the examples to argue. These words and phrases, they should sound kind of familiar to you because oftentimes your signal phrases in a summary will align with the strategies that you've analyzed in the earlier step. So while it's okay to talk about the author says, the author says, the author says, that can get really repetitive and it's not overly descriptive. Remember, your summary is a description of what the text is or what the source is about. Also notice that this particular author does what a good summary is supposed to have, and that is there's more than one signal phrase. We can see in almost every sentence, the author has included a signal phrase to remind us that this is not the author's own idea, this is actually Fudd's idea. A couple other things for you to notice. This summary, like all summaries, is in present tense. Explains, gives, uses. Even though the article might have been written in the past, when we write about other articles and other writing, we always write in the present tense. The other thing that you should notice is the author does not insert his or her own ideas here. This is not the place to agree or disagree, or the place to decide if you like what the author said or what you don't like the author said. A summary is a straight up description. It's not a judgment. Okay, so you've written your first draft of your summary. Step 7 is essential. You have to check for quotes. Summaries do not use quotes. Summaries are overviews. Quotes are too specific for them. So check and make sure that you have not used more than 3 words in a row from the original. Check and make sure that you have not tried to pull quotations out from the original. And check and make sure that you have not used memorable words or phrases from the original. Take a look. If you look back to our original example here, we all know that Elmer Fudd says wabbit with a W, but the author does what you're supposed to do in a summary and give an overview. So instead of replicating that really memorable word, they just simply use the word rabbit. Finally, step 8, revise, 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 and proofread. Okay, so let's review. A strong summary does give a clear picture of the author's whole argument. This is start to finish. You're telling your reader exactly what the entire thing says. A strong summary does use signal phrases, and not just at the beginning. It has to be throughout the summary. A strong summary constantly and consistently makes it clear that all the ideas you're presenting belong to another author and that they're not your own. A strong summary uses present tense. It follows the organization of the original text. And most of all, a strong summary is a description of the text. not just what the author said, play by play, but it gives some sense of why the author said it and what the author is doing. That is, a strong summary uses an analysis of those strategies we've been talking about. A strong summary does not pick and choose which parts to leave out. If a part of the text is difficult, you can't just ignore it. You have to figure out what it says. A strong summary does not use any original wording from the text. And a strong summary does not interpret, judge, or make any other kind of insertion of the writer's own ideas. In short, a strong summary is a translation of the text. When you present a summary, what you are indicating to your audience is you are giving them a solid translation, not word for word, but idea for idea, what the original author has said.